Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. Welcome back to the special edition series of the Safe House based upon the book by Roger Grimes, Data-Driven Computer Defense. The last episode, Roger walked us through the value and necessity of mental maps and operational frameworks. Today is the final episode of this special edition series. Roger will guide us through various implementation examples. Roger, take the wheel.
Okay, so kind of building upon data-driven defense, it's this idea that you try to figure out how you or your organization is most likely to be compromised among the 13 different ways. And then you try to start implementing good preventative, detective, and responsive controls to those threats. And you're always thinking about the initial root causes of hacking. How could you be successfully broken into? Like, if someone's breaking into your house, is it through the windows, the doors, the floors, the windows, the chimney, the attic? Well, you want to do the same thing with your computer, right? And I've covered the 13 ways that all hackers and malware could break into it. The most common ways for most organizations, if you don't have your own data, is social engineering, unpatched software and firmware, and some type of credential theft or credential guessing or something like that. And you start to use that in a mental mind map that every time someone tells you need to patch something or implement a control or respond to something, or you need to install VPNs and stuff like that, I would say that's like a big audit finding. You need to install a VPN. There's not a ransomware victim I know that didn't have a VPN installed already, and antivirus and a firewall. And let me say, they don't hurt you. They're good things to have, right? Because VPNs do stop some small percentage of attacks. Firewalls stop some percentages of attacks. Antivirus somehow must detect something. I don't know. I never seem to find it. But those are not bad things, and you need to have them. But you shouldn't spend 3 months trying to figure out which antivirus to buy, because it's not your problem. Your company is not going to be hacked or not be hacked because you didn't have the right antivirus or VPN. It's not it's not the way attackers attack. It's social engineering, unpatched software, and credential theft. And so you need to figure out how am I going to do that? And for a lot of companies, I need to fight social engineering through software and training. I need to fight unpatched software by patching my software and my firmware better, especially concentrating on the CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, known exploited vulnerability catalog list. And use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Those are the ways that I would recommend that organizations that are facing those three challenges. But it needs to come into every single decision. So let me give you an example why this is kind of important. This is back at my time at Microsoft. When I joined Microsoft, like 1999, 2000, or something like that, it really quickly, Conficker became a big deal. And Conficker was it could be like a USB virus or worm. It could infect you a couple of different ways. It could come to you on USB key, so you plug the USB key in, and it would auto run and infect you that way. It could infect you because you didn't have a particular patch applied, or it can infect you because you had weak password on your shares. They would look for NetBIOS shares and would try like 100 built-in passwords to try to get in on the shares. So it had these three causes. And Microsoft was pretty convinced it was because people didn't have the patching. So they went out of their way whenever you patched. Whenever you do a Microsoft patch, there's this little stub code that goes to check if there's certain things set. One of the things they check for is they try to check to see if you have any common viruses, because viruses or worms would cause problems with patching, and then everybody calling Microsoft because their patching wasn't working is because they were exploited. But they checked and they wanted to see, okay, so they said it's because they just had this gut feeling that most people are being infected by Conficker because they're not patched. But then they started checking and they went, oh, it looks like we have a high percentage of people that are patched months later. And there was I think it was either $1 million or $10 million reward to out the creator of Conficker. Well, they finally decided to start testing stuff. And what they found out was that it was mostly all through USB key. Most people were getting, and it was interesting. I was teaching from Microsoft. Windows Vista was coming out, and I was teaching from Microsoft in India, Chennai, and I was teaching classes on how to install and maintain and troubleshoot and do security configuration on Vista. I was there for a couple of weeks. Conficker breaks out. and it's just going through everybody's network and shutting down machines. And so they send the Microsoft guy around to do this boot to boot with an antivirus program. And every machine he's checking is infected with Conficker. I'm like, hey, let me check your USB key. And it infected it with Conficker, and then spread it to every machine. And that's why we had 100% infection rate. But Microsoft actually ran a research project called Backstreet that Adam Shostak, I think, was in charge of it at the time. If you've ever heard that name, he's a really good threat modeler, really smart guy, been around for a long time. But they looked and found out that the major reason how Conficker was spreading was USB key. So Microsoft, in the next deployment of patches, disabled auto runs. And when they did that, everybody was yelling and screaming, and we had to figure out a way that people could allow it. You could make a registry edit, turn it back on. It wiped out Conficker. After years and years of Conficker not going away, by disabling auto runs by default, once we figured out getting the data, it wiped out Conficker in a month. I mean, there's probably still some Conficker hitting somebody in India somewhere or something, but using the data, like, okay, we have all these people have this gut feeling.
Yeah.
Is it, back up your gut feeling with data. And let me say, sadly, I thought Microsoft was going to start doing that for all patching. Like if we had multiple modalities of attack, we would have a research project figure out how it doesn't happen that way. But let me say, this is like, I'm kind of saddened, like there will be a CISA FBI warning on some type of ransomware. And it will say in the report that the primary way that this thing spreads is social engineering. Or it will say it's typical, common. And then that report will almost never tell you how to defeat social engineering. They'll tell you need to patch your software, you need to have secure, vendors need to create secure by design software, you got to make sure you're using MFA, all this other stuff. But do they tell you to tell people, hey, this ransomware, the most likely way it is to spread is through a file attachment, which is not defeated by MFA. They're already past, right? They're social engineering the human. MFA doesn't help that. It is report after report after report that will say social engineering is the number one way this thing spreads, and then they don't tell you to fight social engineering. Or in the latest Phobos report I was looking at, it's 13 out of 20, and the way they fight it, they say use phishing resistant MFA, which is a good thing. You should do it, but they recommend it 13th out of 20. How is anybody reading that CISA FBI report going to know that that's one of the best things you can do, or to fight social engineering? And they literally, it's in the report multiple times that social engineering is a big deal. Literally says typically, Phobos typically spreads through social engineering. And then it's not mentioned for 7 pages and 20,000 sentences, So a data-driven defense is, hey, I look at how this thing could hurt me, and then am I addressing with the mitigations the right things? And so when you get an alert and you're reading an alert, you can't trust the people that are writing the reports and telling you what to do. They all have their own agendas. My company that I work for, KnowBe4, we have our own agenda, which is fight social engineering. I'm just happy and lucky that social engineering is by far the biggest thing that most people need to address, but not in every company. You could be in a top secret place and are not connected to the internet. It's impossible to be socially engineered inside, the safe room or the SCIF. But so that's an example of, how do I want to fight this thing? Or social engineering. I'm doing social engineering training, right? Social engineering is number one, you get attacked.
Yeah.
What are you going to train in social engineering? What's the most common way? Well, I can tell you for most companies, it's email attacks. After that, it's web attacks. And then maybe it's, what is it after that? Is it like we do QR phishing testing and training? Is that a problem that y'all face? Have you and not only, QR phishing, that's where they send a little QR code and it converts to some rogue thing. Is that happening in your environment? I think there is some cases who say it's happening, but what in percentage? Should you train QR phishing training, or should you do SMS? Because I can tell you everybody's getting SMS codes that are full of scams. But is the SMS scam, just because someone's getting an SMS scam doesn't mean you got everybody clicking it and being compromised.
Right.
But it could be. You could have people that are doing that. So if someone tells me, I want you to do anti-social engineering training, my first thought is, okay, what is the most likely threat and what do I need to train on? Let me give you another good example. I remember, so I was at a big company and they were doing red team testing. So that's where their own teams do penetration testing to try to break in. And the red team had come back with a list of 20 things that were broken that they needed to fix on their servers. And, and I remember the CISO had read my book and he said, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, my red team, he literally did. He was very dismissive of me and he didn't believe in my data-driven defense concept. Although interesting enough, he eventually wrote a supporting statement for it. But at this time, he was very skeptical and he was being very catty to me. But he said, "Okay, I just got this list of 20 things from the red team, and they've taken over our entire company yet again. Okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, which of these 20 things should I do, Mr. Data-driven defense expert?" and my response to him in a data-driven defense mind map was, "Okay, out of these 20 things, which are the ones that are most likely to be used to compromise your systems? Which ones," and this is a large organization with hundreds of thousands of servers, "which of these 20 things have actually been used to break into your company?"
Yeah.
And when we looked at the list and evaluated, it was zero. Like the red team is really good about doing things that, breaking in these unique, fun, scary ways. Oh my God, maybe they sent a QR code or AI deep fake or whatever. You have to ask yourself, okay, there's a difference between what the red team finds and the ways that you're most likely to be broken into. And if the red team finds something that aligns with an actual real world way, that's great. Or let me give you another example. Same company.
Yeah.
They were using a product called Qualys to scan all of their servers to find out what vulnerabilities they had. And love the product. Don't know who owns it or even if it's still around, but Qualys would come back. It would come back with a report on every server saying you had 50 things to fix. It would be programming things, it would be configuration things, it would be patching things. Like every server would have these dozens of things you had to go fix. And again, when I saw the report and they're saying, "Roger, which things we should go fix?" I said, "Which of these things?" And I said to the person to hand me the report, and it had, again, about a third of the report was all high priority. Gotta fix. I said, "Which of these things have been successfully used to break into you?" And they're like, "We don't know." And I'm like, "Well, don't start just fixing stuff. You can't fix 50 things at once times 100,000 servers. Well, let's find out how you've been compromised." And they actually had to do some digging, but they found the data. And it was interesting. They went across the hundreds of thousands of servers and found that the most likely reason why they'd been broken into that they had documented was hard-coded credentials. So those hard-coded credentials were in the software code that people could readily find. They were plain text credentials they would find on the hard drive. It was in software that was committed on GitHub. That's a really common problem.
Yeah.
But they realized, they went, "Oh, our number one threat is hard-coded credentials." And that was a finding on the Qualys report, but it was one of, 30 other high priority findings. So in Qualys, we actually were able to, they had a prioritization field. We're able to add and say this thing, anything that's, whenever you find hard-coded credentials, that got brought up as the top critical finding. And users had to go fix that within a week or 2 weeks or something like that. But that's how you do a data-driven defense. You always ask, every time someone hands you, you're going to the rest of your life be handed task that you're being told to go do something, or defenses or controls. Here's the NIST cybersecurity framework. I need you to go make sure we're compliant. And you need to start by going, okay, let me threat model my organization. What are the most likely root cause threats? What are the things I'm being asked to do, controls, education, whatever, that is going to give me the most bang for the buck? I mean, let me say again, the data-driven mindset is I'm going to look at the ways I'm most likely to be attacked in the near future and concentrate on preventing those things. And it sounds so easy. And let me say, I've given the data-driven defense talk over the last decade. I don't know. I am or am not exaggerating 1,000 times. I'll have people that really come up and are kind of, fanboys. They're like, "This is great. This is waking my mind. I'm taking the red pill. It's woken me up from the matrix. And you've changed my thinking." Almost all of them, then within minutes to a day, reverted to the old mindset. It's really difficult. They're like, "Oh, I've got to go implement this thing. I've got to go." I've been handed a red team report. Oh my God, they broke into my servers. They got all to our data. I'm not as impressed with the red team report unless it actually maps to how real world attackers. And they're like, no, the guy came in and he found this Kerberos token and he went from the Kerberos token to the blah, 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 blah. Like they come up with these really scary things and the emotion and the excitement in the moment because they've told you you've got some threat. They can wirelessly sniff your credit cards, you know, and there's this threat that if you don't, they can immediately remotely take you over. You always have to go, is that scary thing the right thing to fear?
But red teams by definition need to show that they did something, I would think. You know, there's a certain amount of emotion in it. It's like, oh, I'm on the red team. I'm going to find something here. And then when they get in there, it's like all these exposed things. And it sounds like it may not be all that bad because, yeah, you have a list of 20 things that the red team uncovered, but none of them apply to me. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, or I'd say a lot of times they'll find stuff that is what hackers would do.
Okay.
And you just have to make sure because they're going to give you some stuff that catches the CEO and CISO's attention. And they're going to go tell you have to go fix these 20 things or these 7 things. And the way that a data-driven mindset comes back is always says, okay, which one of these are truly, truly cutting the most risk? Just because if I find Meltdown Inspector, just because I find something that could be wormable and exploitable, doesn't mean how I'm likely to be attacked. Like let's say Log4j came out, and that was a really big exploit. I think it was ranked as a 10. You know, as far as on the CVS scoring scale. And let me say, it was a big vulnerability. But if you read the news reports, it was the worst thing since Meltdown Inspector. It was the biggest thing, bigger than Meltdown Inspector. At least it was actually being exploited. But there were a ton of organizations where it was not Log4j unpatched was all throughout their environment, but it was not being advertised in a public way that it actually was at risk of being compromised by hackers. You know, and the same thing, the red team's going to come back with this report. You're going to see, or your patching report, or your antivirus report, or your audit. Your audit's going to come back with 20, 60 things. And when I was in Microsoft, I used to do audits for companies. I don't think I delivered an audit that didn't have 60 or 80 things on it. You know, and let me say about a third of them would be stuff that was on every audit report. You know, you need to do credential hygiene and, you know, stuff. But there would always be a ton of high critical stuff because the lawyers are saying, well, if it can be used to exploit them, I better tell them or else they could sue me. And let me say, you're not always going to be right. If I'm telling you to concentrate on social engineering and patching and using MFA, a SQL injection could take you down. But a data-driven defense says concentrate on the ways that you're most likely to be. I mean, it's insane to concentrate on the things that aren't going to impact you. But I'm telling you here and today that there's 100,000 people in this world are being told to go fix their TLS 1.2 vulnerabilities because it's showing up on an audit and it's not compliant, and they're now moving that team to do it. Or I talk to teams. So security awareness training is one of the best things you could do. When I came into KnowBe4 6 years ago, not a single compliance regulation, NIST, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, PCI DSS talked about security awareness training. And I really fought to have it. It's now in every one of them. I don't know if I had something to do with it. I like to think I had something to do with it because I'm always bitching about it. But now all of them have security awareness training, but they require once a year. Once a year is almost like not doing it. And it's just so weird that if social engineering is your biggest risk, is focusing on it once a year really right? Like
it's like your newsletter suggestion. It's like every month it should be that and whatever's new, that and whatever's the two things, maybe patching and social engineering are the first two things you see on your newsletter, and then whatever else soup du jour, if you will, or disaster du jour.
And let me say that, you will think everybody knows what you know now that you've got the red pill. Like, so when I started doing data-driven defense, unpatched Java was the number one problem. And I remember going to the Microsoft security guy that was in charge of vulnerability analysis. And I said, hey, do you know how we're most likely to get compromised? And he thought about it. He's like, no. And I showed him my 13 ways. He goes, I don't know. I said, well, I'm going out to all these clients and it's unpatched Java, and I don't see there's any reason why Microsoft wouldn't be the same, that it's the number one way we're broken into is unpatched Java. He does a scan, comes back a month later. He's like, it is unpatched Java. I'm like, okay. So we went around and aggressively started patching Java, and we closed a big hole that was out there, I think more aggressively than a lot of companies. Well, we're getting ready to push out server 2012 or 13 or 16, or I don't remember, one of the server versions. And they were putting a big multimedia service on it. It was going to be one of the highlights of the product. And I found out they were using an unpatched Java version. And I wrote them, you have to stop this. They were going to deploy brand new versions of Microsoft Server with unpatched Java. And I was screamed at. I was yelled at. I was threatened to be fired. I was reported to the company's CEO and CISOs. I was told I was a terrible person. Even worse, this is where it gets even worse. A good friend of mine, a smart, capable, good friend of mine that worked on my same team, had done the security analysis of the product and had approved it, even knowing that it had unpatched Java. And the reason why is he had bought the programmer statements of why unpatched Java wasn't a problem. I was like, this is even embarrassing just from a PR perspective that Microsoft is knowingly installing unpatched Java. And I fought and I fought. They ended up killing the product in that version of server. I think if you talk to most people involved with that, they still see me as the evil guy. But even my coworker ended up being this integral part, and they're like, your own team security reviewed this and said it was okay. And when I talked to him and explained to him about how unpatched Java, he said, I didn't know. I did not know, Roger, and he apologized. You can't assume because you're awake and you understand how to read the data and the tea leaves now. You can't assume that anyone around you understands this thing. So you have to start creating your own path and your own, your own path to understanding data-driven defense. Someone says, Roger, I need you to patch all the Windows workstations and servers or whatever. Your first thought should be which patches are most important that get applied. Maybe in your environment, it's not Windows patching at all. Maybe what you need to go do is fix the web cameras or the routers, right? You go into the CISA known and exploited vulnerability catalog list, and oh boy, they've got all our wireless routers in there, and it's being actively exploited by this ransomware group, or they're attacking RDP because of weak passwords. Maybe our problem is not to patch right now; it's to make sure we have strong passwords or we have phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. If you get a Qualys vulnerability report that says you've got 50 things to fix, what's your first thought? Which of these 50 things are going to give me the most bang for the buck in decreasing risk? And just because you can be exploited, there is a gulf of difference between how you can be exploited and how you will be exploited. I need you to push these group policies. And if you look at group policy, there's all kinds of great reasons I need to lock down my browser and this or that. Is it something that's going to impact a real world threat? The vast majority of what you push through group policy, that's all great stuff. It's all great, I guess. But is it really stopping the ways that we're most likely to be attacked? If they go tell you to patch, we need to patch our, blah, 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 blah. Is it ever been attacked? Go look. Is it on the CISA known vulnerability exploited catalog list? If it's not, well, maybe you still need to patch it, but maybe I need to make sure I need to patch what's on that list first. It's a strange thing where we all know how we're being exploited, unpatched software, social engineering, and credential reuse. Yet we're buying these $100,000 intrusion detection softwares and antivirus and VPNs. Get VPN. If I look at the data, almost every single person compromised by ransomware had a VPN. The data show me that it's not as protective as we think. So maybe it's still good to have a VPN, but maybe I should get the social engineering stuff under control first. Because if I don't get the social engineering stuff under control, VPN ain't saving me.
So, but like compliance figures into the mix now. So that then juggles the priorities, does it not? Or does it got a train wreck to hold the data? No,
you're right. Yeah. I do lots of stuff that I maybe don't want to do. Yeah. But I say when I have the opportunity to impact it, then I'm going to try to impact it. And let me say with compliance, you're going to have to comply. You're going to have to go fix TLS level 2, especially if you're trying to get a big client and that's the blocker. But if you can, you start talking to your CISO going, hey, we noticed these are the biggest risk by far.
Yeah.
And I think we need to concentrate and put more resources on, like patching. Everybody thinks everybody I've ever been's got 99% patching. And they're like, we're 99%. The 1% they're not getting to is the stuff that's being used to compromise them. Are you even looking at your firmware? Most patching schedules don't even have firmware in it. Or people are like, did I upgrade my BIOS? Let me say, I just updated my BIOS on my laptop. Thank God. Have I heard of anybody compromising my Dell laptop because it didn't have the latest BIOS version? No. It's good to have the latest BIOS version, but is having the old version being used to successfully attack anyone? I haven't read that. So it's all right to patch it, but maybe it doesn't become the top thing just because the red team found some 0-day exploit that works through my company's BIOS, my laptop BIOS. So it's all about literally reframing how you look at real risk. And again, that's maybe there's a gulf between how you're being told to worry and how you really should be worrying.
Yeah.
Because the world is telling you have to concentrate on all the bubbles in a glass of champagne. And risk is not like bubbles in a glass of champagne. It's like most companies I've ever been in have 2 or 3 big problems that overwhelm everything else, but they don't spend 3% of their focus on it. And that is that fundamental problem between how you are most likely to be attacked and how people are acting like they would be attacked is the reason why we're so attacked. Like people go, I hear this all the time. I heard this the other day. You can't stop attack. If you're going to be attacked, you're going to be attacked successfully, right? And maybe there's some truth to it. But I think it's really truthful because we're not really trying. Like everybody, no, what are you talking about? We're spending millions of dollars and I have a staff of 10 or 100 or whatever. How many are focused on stopping social engineering and make sure you got perfect patching on the stuff that's patched? Like literally your patch management is usually one guy. In a small company, it's one guy that's doing 10 other things. In a big company, it's one guy, maybe 2 guys for backup. And he's running a report, and every month he's showing that he's 99% patched, and no one's trying to find out what is that last remaining. What's the odds that 1% is the stuff that people are attacking? Right? Because that one, just because you got 99% doesn't mean anything if it's all unpatched Java.
Yeah, the big risk. Well, it sure makes a lot of sense when you start to break it down and say, look, let's just focus on the 2 things that get us 90% there. So it's instead of the 80-20 rule, it's a 290 rule, potentially, or maybe it's a 380 rule or something along those lines. It's very small number of items that probably get about 80-90% pretty quick in terms of.
I've never done an analysis where the 3 things didn't equate to 99% of the risk.
Really? 399?
Yeah, I mean, it's just people equate, like people will go, no, we got compromised by credential theft. Again, it's an outcome of a real attack. Or ransomware was our problem. Or I see, I don't know, people commingle root causes with outcomes of root causes. And so they'll say, oh, I got to worry about this or that. It's if they calculate it correctly, again, initial root causes versus out. And let me say, everybody gets it wrong. MITRE, the attack matrix, which I love, gets it wrong. They don't have enough initial hacking threats listed, and they put phishing and stuff in some other places, and they forget some stuff and they miss some stuff out of the third. And I've ridden them for years, begging them, please get it right. Please accurately account for how you're most likely, they call it initial access. I said, you're missing stuff. And I even talked to the guy that's in charge of the list, and he's like, well, we can't go about changing it now. We have so many people relying upon it. I'm like, no, you're still young. You're still young. It's only been out a couple of years. Now's the time to fix it before you have a bazillion. But now there's a bazillion people. Now it's years of reliance, and they're relying upon it. It's incorrectly categorized. And I've said stuff like, let's meet. And I've gone to MITRE, including the leaders, and said, listen, let's just get some smart people in a room and figure out if you have it right. Maybe my 13's wrong and I'm an idiot. Maybe it's not applicable to the way that you're making the attack matrix, but let's get some people in a room. Instead, it's really just one or two guys by themselves deciding what should be in that list and slowly modifying it as they're needed, but there are literally large gaps in it. So anyways, that's what, I've never found a company where three things didn't equate to 99% of the risk. Yeah, and I say if you get one thing done, you become my hero, because we're not allowed to do one thing. We're told we have to 80 projects and 10 of them are number ones, right? It's our life is very hard. So thank you so much for allowing me to share this. And let me say, I welcome anybody emailing me about this. I'm Roger G@knowbefore.com, KNOWBE number 4.com. Reach out to me. I get about 100 emails a day. I respond to them all if I have time. And, I love talking to people. We're in this together to fight the good fight. And, I'm giving you the red pill. You do with it what you can, and I'll be glad to help you along if you have questions.
Roger, I tell you what, I believe, and we talked about this earlier, that this may be podcast history, quite frankly, taking an entire book and walking through it. It's been a fantastic, almost an odyssey, but the adventure was amazing. Thank you for taking the time, investing in it. The SafeHouse Initiative genuinely appreciates, and all our, global users, the tens of thousands, nearly millions now. Really appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourself, and then to also walk us through the data-driven computer defense mindset, if you will, because we need to adopt that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your podcast. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think what you are all doing is one of the best things, right? We're on this world only for a short time, and we're on here to help other people and make the world a better place. Yeah. And your podcast is doing exactly that. So thank you to you and your friends and everybody on the podcast that puts it together. Y'all are doing phenomenal work.
Thank you. You take care of yourself. We'll talk soon, my friend.
Okay, take care, everyone. Continue to fight the good fight.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the SafeHouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information on the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen. Send us an email at safehouseinitiative.org@gmail.com, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.